Atticus Apprentice suggests that Susan should look at the events in the novel in the order they occurred. The death of Mary Blakiston, her funeral, then the burglary at Pye Hall. Atticus also claims that it's not what Alan Conway wrote that matters, but why he wrote it. He asks Susan to learn about Alan's state of mind. Well, let's rewind a bit. Should we look at Alan's death in the order it occurred? Alan was a teacher at a school with Katie, Andreas, and his wife Melissa. The students didn't like him, he was strict. He wanted to be rich and famous, so he writes some Atticus Apprentice novels, and he becomes rich and famous. Did he steal the idea from another author? Almost immediately, Alan clashed with his editor Susan. After some time, he left his wife and son and began a relationship with James Taylor. He felt so strongly for James that he wrote his will to leave everything to James. He bought a big house, his perfect place in the world, except for an annoying neighbor. At a certain point, he had been working on these novels with his sister, but he cuts her out entirely. Despite everything, Alan hated the success the Atticus Apprentice novels brought him. At a writer's conference, a writer pitches a mystery entitled MAGPIE Murders. We don't know the order, but Alan gives his main character Atticus Apprentice a deadly tumor. Either after, or most likely before, he found out he had stage 4 cancer. Alan steals that writer's idea for MAGPIE Murders, then populates that story with mean-spirited versions of people in his life, including basing the victim of a vicious death on his hated editor Susan's father. Why bring Susan's family into this brutal attack? How much did Alan hate Susan? Let's Solve MAGPIE Murders, Season 1, Episode 3. We'll be breaking down each episode for clues, suspects, and red herrings, on the hunt to learn who killed Alan Conway, if he was killed, who killed Mary Blakiston, if she was killed, and who killed Sir Magnus Pye. Spoilers for the first 3 episodes of MAGPIE Murders. If you haven't seen all 3 episodes, flash back to the couch and watch the first 3 episodes. If you're listening to this podcast on an app like Apple Podcast or Spotify, please subscribe and leave a written review. It really helps us out. If you're on YouTube, I need you to blast that like button. Smash it. And leave us a comment. And above all, if you can, subscribe. These algorithms love likes, comments, and subscriptions. We need your help. Before we look at the real-life suspects, let's see what Episode 3 taught us about our victim, author Alan Conway. Alan is adamant about his stories, or the stories he steals. He wrote sections about Atticus being cold and hungry in a Nazi prison camp, and he's pissed off when Susan wants to cut that stuff from his 3rd novel. He wants his books, which he spends so much time on, or stealing to spend so much time on, to be more than a solution to a puzzle, a la The Butler did it. He wants to include serious subjects and things that relate to the human condition. Alan changed the name of his mansion from Ridgeway Hall to Abbey Grange, based on a Sherlock Holmes story, despite never being a Sherlock Holmes fan. Perhaps Alan liked that the Abbey Grange story had a fake burglary. Alan loved Agatha Christie, borrowed from her all the time. At a writer's conference, Alan reads a piece of fiction that he wrote that wasn't from one of his Atticus Apprentice novels, but instead it was a book called The Slide, where the protagonist is unaware that the dog is in fact himself. Alan claims it's a novel about empire, the people at the top, and the collapse of civility. Alan appears to have stolen the entire outline for MAGPIE Murders from a writer who took that course he led. On Thursday night before he died, Alan got drunk at a dinner with Charles. He demands the title be MAGPIE Murders, not The MAGPIE Murders. And he called the waiter who dropped some plates, who was also a writer who came up with the idea for MAGPIE Murders, an idiot. Now let's look at those suspects, and Susan Ryeland still has to be #1 suspect on our list. In a previous episode, Susan said that she and Alan didn't get on from the jump, and they only communicated via email. But this opening flashback proves that they did meet occasionally. Alan and Susan argued 7 years prior about the editing of the 3rd Atticus Apprentice novel. They argued about the structure, what the audiences wanted out of Alan's mysteries. Susan wanted Alan to focus on the mysteries themselves. That's what she thought his audience wanted, not flashbacks to Nazi prison camps that didn't play a role in resolving the mystery. Alan told Susan that maybe she shouldn't be the one editing his books. Susan goes with Charles to the people who are going to be buying the publishing company City World. And Susan and Charles don't tell City World that they don't have the final chapter to Alan's latest book. Susan also won't give City World her answer if she'll be CEO of the new company. Susan calls Alan a bastard and blames him for not inviting her to his own funeral. Susan believes Alan's sister Claire lied about reading the manuscript Magpie Murders. At times, Susan has gone over the edge. She's drinking way too much wine, and she's having long discussions with a fictional character, Atticus Apprentice. Susan claims she's read the Magpie Murders manuscript 3 times, but she still can't figure out who did it. She also can't figure out if she wants to go to Crete with Andreas or not. Susan snaps at her sister Katie because she doesn't want to see her father, who walked out on the 2 of them and their mother. Susan's got father issues, and Atticus Apprentice implies it's about infidelity. Susan's boyfriend Andreas, they've been a couple for 6 years, so 1 year after she fought with Alan in that flashback, she started dating Andreas. Andreas asks Susan if she saw Alan's lawyer, but doesn't say why, because he had been there. He also asks her if she has any suspects in the novel. Andreas doesn't talk much about the time when he, Alan, and Katie were teachers. Andreas claims he didn't really know Alan, but he did go to Alan's marriage to Melissa. Andreas tells Susan that his broke cousin borrowed some money, and that's how he bought the hotel in Crete. Andreas also makes a statement he's leaving at the end of the school term. A few episodes ago, he said he wouldn't leave without her, but now Andreas is leaving either way. He's pressuring Susan to join him. He loves her, but he believes her current job makes her miserable. Alice, the assistant at Clover Books. Alice is also reading the Magpie Murders manuscript. Alice is only 50 pages in, but she suspects Joyce Underling. Alice also claims that she solved Alan's last novel, Atticus Apprentice Abroad, where the nun did it. Charles Clover. With Susan, he didn't tell the City World buyers that the final Atticus Apprentice book isn't complete. Charles hadn't been out to Suffolk in months, but he did have that dinner with Alan on Thursday night. He and Alan went to the supper club La Maison. Alan got really drunk. Did Charles want him to be drunk? Alan really pushed him. The novel had to be the Magpie Murders. Susan's sister Katie. Katie keeps calling Susan to discuss their father, who's in poor health. Katie thinks Susan should see their father to get emotionally past her issues with him. New suspect this week is Max Ryeland, who is the basis of Sir Magnus Pye in Magpie Murders. Max is father to Susan and Katie. He's in the hospital, and he keeps moaning that he needs to see Susan. Why? Max has had a stroke. If he has another one, he'll die, according to Katie. Professional waiter/amateur writer Lee Jaffery. Lee called in at the last minute to work at the restaurant the night Alan was there, and Lee is the one who dropped the plates when he saw Alan. Lee took the writing course from Alan and claims that Alan stole his idea when he asked Alan for help. Lee was in the audience when Alan was reading from that novel The Slide, where the protagonist is unaware that the dog is in fact himself. Lee couldn't connect with it. He was like, what is this poppycock? In Lee's book, the killer is the wife, Lady Penelope, in his story. She was having an affair with a tennis coach. He wrote to someone at Clover Books named Jemima to complain about his idea being stolen, but he never heard back. According to Susan, his book isn't very good. The writing is a little rough. Lee did know that Alan lived in Suffolk. Our final suspect, I don't have a picture for. We've never seen her, but it's the character named Jemima. We actually heard Jemima's name mentioned in episode 1. She was the person who had made the copies of the Magpie Murders manuscript. Jemima worked at Clover Books, but she left rather quickly for a different job. People believe that she didn't like working at Clover Books. April assumes Jemima left because she wasn't getting enough money. And that's backed up when Charles said he couldn't pay her enough to keep her. Jemima sends an email to Charles saying she copied what was given to her and she didn't miss any pages when she was making the Magpie Murder manuscript copies. We spend more time in the Magpie Murders novel, and we learn a little bit more about our victim, Mary Blakiston, possible victim. Mary knew everybody in the village, and everybody knew her. People described her as a busybody. Mary's temporary grave marker is a simple wooden cross. Mary's buried next to her son's grave, Sam Blakiston, who died at 12 years old in 1943. Mary and her family used to live on a farm, but when the boy's father left, the family moved into the lodge house at Pye Hall. Mary's son Robert claims his mother worshipped Sir Magnus because he was the lord of the manor. Mary was ice cold to Joy. "You're not going to marry my son. I'm thinking about future generations. They can't be tainted. I won't have it." Later, Mary says, "I'm warning you, Robert, this marriage will not go ahead." We've heard for a few episodes about the tragedy at the lake, which happened 12 years before. 1943 is when it happened. We've also heard people wonder, was Sir Magnus responsible? We can assume that this tragedy has something to do with Sam's death, and Robert said his brother died in an accident. We have one more victim to look at, and that's Sir Magnus Pye, who, remember, is based on Susan's father, Max Ryeland, in real life. According to Susan, who has read this manuscript, the burglary at Pye Hall was a fake burglary. What does that mean? Now, Sir Magnus blamed Brent for that robbery, and he fired him on the night he died. Brent implies that Sir Magnus fooled around with many of his staff members, and he could have illegitimate children out in the world. Sir Magnus and Lady Frances have a huge fight, and Sir Magnus claims that Frances married him for his money and his house, the land, his titles, not for love. Let's look at the suspects in the novel MAGPIE Murders. Lead detective Atticus Apprentice. Atticus isn't doing well. He's taking pills for his tumor, but remember, he's not got time to go skiing. Atticus still won't tell his assistant James about his health problems, a bit like how Alan wouldn't tell James about his health problems. Atticus discovers the silver which was stolen from Pye Hall in the antique shop run by Jack Whiteley. As he leaves the shop, Atticus mentions that he has a chapter in his book dedicated to criminal stupidity. James Fraser, who remember is based on James Taylor, Alan's ex-boyfriend in real life. James thinks that Mary Blakiston would have been lucky to have a daughter-in-law like Joy Sunderling. Joy has interesting testimony in this episode. She says Mary Blakiston was a horrible woman, but also says that Mary had been kind to her until she announced that she was getting married to Robert. Joy says Mary disapproved of the marriage because Mary was racist. Joy once again states that she was with Robert the entire morning when his mother died. Yet she also says that if Robert did it, she'd forgive him. After Atticus Apprentice leaves, Joy complains to Robert that he should have told Apprentice about his brother Sam at the lake. 3 deaths at Pye Hall. Mary Blakiston's son Robert. Robert works at the garage. I can't even say it how these Brits say it. The garage is what I'd say. He keeps saying, "He got me a job here at the garage." Robert's standoffish to Atticus. He doesn't tell him everything he knows because Robert believes Sam's death has nothing to do with anything. 3 deaths, 12 years apart. Robert said that Sir Magnus was like a father to him. He got him a job at the garage, and he got him the flat. Robert was frustrated with his mother, though. She never left him alone. Mary called Robert the biggest disappointment in her life. Robert snapped at his mom when she asked him to fix a light in her house, and everybody in town overheard that outburst. Brent was at Pye Hall at the time of Mary Blakiston's death, but he claims he was back at his place in the village when the burglary happened, and he left Pye Hall at 8 p.m. on the night Sir Magnus died, which was at 9 p.m., or so we're told. Brent discovered Mary Blakiston's body. He says he knew something was wrong because the phone kept ringing and Mary never answered it. He discovered her body laying on the floor at the bottom of the stairs. Brent never got on with Mary, he thinks because she thought he was below her. Brent says Mary and Sir Magnus were very close, but that Sir Magnus wouldn't have tried anything romantic with Mary because she was too old for him. And again, Brent is the one who says Sir Magnus fooled around with much of the staff. Lot of pies in the oven is how Brent described it. Just like there's a character in the real-life mystery who we don't have a picture of, never seen, in the book, there's a suspect who's never been on screen yet either. Miss Darnley. Miss Darnley was a governess at Pye Hall who looked after Magnus's son Frederick. Brent claims that Miss Darnley left after fooling around with Sir Magnus. According to Susan, Miss Darnley doesn't appear in the book MAGPIE Murders unless she appears in that last chapter. Sir Magnus Pye's wife, Frances. She is upset with her husband's affairs, and she yells that she shouldn't have married him, and she should cut him with a knife. Jack Whiteley. Obviously, this is based on the neighbor, Jack White, in real life. Jack Whiteley runs an antique shop in the village, and at his shop, in the window, is the stolen silver brooch from Pye Hall. Jack won't tell Atticus Apprentice how he got the silver, and he panics and pulls the silver from the window after Atticus leaves. Jack's wife, Gemma. She covers for her husband when Poon says the stolen silver was in the window. Those are the clues I found in this week's episode. Let's go to our detective Catfish to see how far along he is in solving these mysteries. We are halfway through the series. Have you solved it yet?
Well, Bubba, I'm very, very close to solving it. What I like to say is I'm sort of expanding my suspect list in order to ensnare everyone, and so I can squeeze the juice out of them.
Hey, Catfish, you like to point out your triple M's.
My triple M, my amusing magpie moments.
Let's hear them.
Bubba, I just have two today. When the gravediggers were talking about Mary, they said, a right busybody she was, just a body now. Oh, zing. And then when Brent, a.k.a. Lady Chatterley's lover, says that that one of the maids left with a little pie in the oven. What?
Naughty.
It would have been funny if he said instead of a Magnus Pye, a mini pie in the oven.
And they have those meat pies over in England. Not the type of pies we like.
No, we want apple and sugar.
All right. What did you think of the double S?
Smart Susan.
Yeah.
She knows, and I wish she had told this to the writers of House of the Dragon, that you shouldn't do time jumps in series.
Well, she and Alan definitely had a big brawl about that. Now, I understand Alan's character, Atticus, you've been doing some apprenticeship with him.
Well, I have. You know what? I figured he is so smart, this Atticus Punt, that I thought every week I would try to listen for things he says and try to live my life by those lessons, because he's able to solve everything and I can't. So I had actually 3 different lessons I learned from him today, because he's so much smarter than me. Number 1, he says, pay attention to the order in which things occur, because I guess an event could be influenced by a previous event as opposed to an event being influenced by a succeeding event. So thank you, Magnus, for teaching me that the order in which things happen matter. He also said, don't overlook the obvious.
Oh, yeah.
You know, that's good for me. I mostly just look at the obvious. And the number third thing he said that I learned from tonight, he says, not everyone has a choice to get out of the graveyard, which is a great lesson to learn, and reminds me, Bubba, when I lived in San Francisco, there's a city south of San Francisco called Colma, where there's the majority of dead people, because there's a lot of cemeteries there. So when you go into Colma, there's a great billboard that says, it's great to be alive in Colma. So there we go. Those are my Atticus apprenticeship moments. So thank you, Atticus, for teaching me these things.
Now, last week, you picked a red herring of the week, and you said it was Susan's boyfriend, Andreas, being in the solicitor's office, picking up that check. Do you have a red herring for episode 3?
Absolutely, Bubba. The red herring of this week is Jemima's sudden disappearance. Oh, Jemima's going to be a big part of this whole thing. Take it from Catfish. It's a complete red herring. Ignore it. You're safe to ignore it completely.
But now, hold on. Jemima was who that waiter / amateur writer sent his complaint to.
Correct.
And she apparently wasn't getting paid enough there at Clover Books, and so she disappears after she makes the copy of MAGPIE Murders without the final chapter. So that's nothing to do with anything.
You're conflating two things that sort of indict separate people, that when you put them together, you make it sound important. But there's 2 things happening here. She knew that he had stolen the book, but also she's not really in league with our Double W.
Double W?
Yeah, our writing waiter. Okay. So she ignored it. So I guess the company could have gotten in trouble because she ignored it. But now the book's in, and if she has the ending, the only reason you think she's doing that is she's going to extort money from somebody. So even though those 2 things together don't add up to the same issue to me. So feel free to ignore it.
Wonderful. That said, Every time I go out to eat, I'm going to assume that person has a great story idea. So I'm going to steal their story when I'm at dinner. And then also, I'm going to get Stephen King's last chapter. And then I'm going to kill him. Put him in the pet cemetery so I can make money.
And then just let me ask you this, Bubba.
Sure.
What's your next move after that?
Profit.
Okay. All right. Okay. I thank you for explaining in detail how you would do that. I loved Susan. Like, she goes to this writer who is clearly not great, and obviously a lot of things were stolen, but I'm betting the ending wasn't stolen. But Susan still give it a good shot. So who did it? And then he's like, the wife, and I'm sure she was like, oh crap, that sucks.
Right. She had an affair with a tennis pro. This book doesn't have a tennis pro. Thanks for nothing. Let's do some quick hits, Catfish. Okay. We do spend an extra amount of time with Susan and her personal issues, which may or may not have anything to do with these mysteries.
Good point.
Quick hit. Should Susan leave to Crete with her boyfriend or / unsignificant other, Andreas? What do you think?
I think she should, just because it's Crete. There's beautiful water. The only problem could be the financial situation in Greece. Always seems to be a little suspect. But yeah, what is she going to deal with this stuff anymore? She's done.
Why do you suspect Alan was so obsessed with having his final novel, as it turned out, be titled MAGPIE Murders and not The MAGPIE Murders?
Dim Catfish has to assume two things. First of all, how did I not? I'm gonna ding myself for something and then promote myself for something. First, I'm gonna ding myself for not realizing earlier that Magpie is Magnus Pye. I don't. That is really, really dumb of me. But I'm gonna promote myself because last week I said to you, Alan loved anagrams, and anagrams were gonna have something to do with solving of this story. So, of course, if you're going to do an anagram of something, you can't just throw in another word. You can't throw in 3 more letters and still make it work, especially TH and E. What can you make out of that? Het? F? No good. So, Bubba, the next thing I'm going to do is, before next week, I am either going to personally or by using the power of the internet, try to figure out some anagrams for MAGPIE Murders.
Wonderful. I think that'll be very fascinating. No comment otherwise from me with my possible spoilers.
But I did call it last week, didn't I say, Bubba? I said an anagram was going to be important. I'm telling you right here, without any knowledge and without much faith in my own abilities, what are red herrings and what's important?
Okay. 2 more quick hit questions.
Yes.
This next quick hit question we do on a bunch of our podcasts, and it's called Who's the Worst? And so, who's the worst of these 3 cheating, Dingle-Dell developing Sir Magnus Pye?
I love it.
Or is it racist Mary Blakiston? Have to keep the bloodline pure. Ooh. Or the creator of those 2 terrible characters and a mean-spirited SOB, Alan Conway.
Wow, Bubba. Well, I feel like it would be cheating to say Alan Conway because I felt like I was cheating last week when I said, obviously, Alan Conway is the one who murdered Magnus Pye and Mary Blakiston since she wrote their deaths. So I'm going to say the worst is Alan Conway. Why? Because I'm sure that first of all, he is just like Magnus Pye and trying to develop. Well, he's anti-Magnus Pye in the development, but also he's racist. He's just an all-around bad dude. So I'm going to say Alan Conway.
All righty. Final quick hit question.
Okay.
The episode ends with what could possibly be a shocking reveal. Sir Magnus Pye, the person whose head was chopped off, is based on Susan's father. Whoa. What was Alan doing? Why was he doing it? Did they butt heads that much in the flashback that he thought, you know what, I'll chop off her father's head, metaphorically, in a fictional story?
Well,
what do you think's going on there?
Well, Bubba, first of all, you unlike me, are mesmerized by a little dance, little dog and pony show. Not me. I see right through to it because last week I said I cleared Susan of the crime, but not double S, Susan's sister. So Susan says to her not so significant other, Andreas, she tries to prod him in this episode. Tell me more about your past. You hung out with him a little bit, and he is quiet-lipped about this whole thing. Susan's husband, Andreas, and Susan's sister, also known as Susan's sister.
Yes.
They have suspicious connections. So I think that he interacted more with Susan's father through Susan's sister than through Susan. There's some backstory there. Suspiciously sipping Susan's sister from last week.
Oh, man. Love it, love it, love it. Listeners, what do you think? Why would Alan base Sir Magnus on Susan and Katie's father? Let's hear those answers. If you're on YouTube, go type them down in the chat below. If you want to hit us up on Twitter or Instagram, it's at @PPHQ. All right, real quickly, I want to do some Double B Bubba book talk.
Do it.
And so we had feedback, I believe, on last week's podcast from a listener who found the novel MAGPIE Murders that this show is based on slow and boring. I was the other way. I read the book and I loved it. I read every Agatha Christie novel between when I was 12 to when I was 17. I read them all. And my whole life I've been like, ooh, could somebody write an Agatha Christie-like novel that I would love? And this author of this book, Anthony Horowitz, he's the real deal. He's written 2 of these Atticus Poon stories, and they are the closest thing to Agatha Christie stories you will ever find. It has a 4-star rating on Goodreads, so people do love it. Why would someone find it slow and boring? Well, the one trick about it is this is a 600-page book. You've got a 300-page Atticus Poon mystery in it, and a 300-page Susan Ryeland. Oh, I got to find this missing chapter story in it. So it is big. 600 pages is way too long. Plus, it's a book, and you don't have pictures telling or actors playing both characters. So we're figuring out, oh, wait, this character is based on this person versus, okay, this person is a clone of this person. It is very tricky. The biggest change, believe it or not, in between the novel and the television show is in the novel, we don't know Susan's age exactly, but Andreas is 50 years old. And so you would assume if Andreas is 50 years old, the character of Susan in the novel is somewhere in her 40s, and this is a midlife crisis. Where here on the show, we love the actress Lesley Manville, but she's 66, and you're like, should you run the new company or lady just retire? Like you've had a good life. Let me do a Double B Bubba brag real quick. In these 2 novels, almost immediately, I want to say in the first 5 to 10 pages, I solved what was going on with Alan Conway's death. I did. I thought it was super easy to solve, and I solved it. On the flip side, in the 300 pages of the Atticus Poon mystery MAGPIE Murders, I completely whiffed. I had no idea. In the novel, there was this whole section about, okay, who was where when Sir Magnus was killed? Because they keep mentioning Sir Magnus was killed around 9 o'clock. And in the novel, all these characters, it's like, okay, this person was walking from here to here. This person was going from here to here. And I got completely lost, and I couldn't solve it at all. And when I got to the end of the novel, I was like, oh, man, I'm an idiot. I was getting caught by the flashing lights and not focused on, well, who would want to kill Sir Magnus? And so I messed up. Hey, did you read the novel? Are you watching this as a fun spoiler perspective to see how Catfish is doing watching the show? Once again, don't give us any spoilers, but down in the comments on YouTube or at PPHQ, tell us what you thought and how you did in your attempt to solve it. So now, Catfish, it's time. We ask this every week. Was Alan Conway actually killed? Was it an accident? Was it suicide? If he was killed, who are your top 3 suspects?
I'm going to do all new suspects this week, Bubba.
Oh, no.
My ass covering continues. So to do that, I'm making more work for myself because I have to gather together all the suspects I've previously used. So the previous suspects from the first 2 episodes, was that his neighbor,
right?
His son, his sister.
Sure.
Then last week was Susan's sister, Alan's suicide to F with everybody, and Zahid the lawyer who didn't like how he was portrayed.
That's
so
6 suspects. Okay.
From 2 episodes, yes. So starting off tonight, my number 3 suspect is Susan's boss, Charles. He, when he had dinner, Alan ordered too much Javro Chamberton, which I don't even know if that's the right way to say it. He killed him over an argument over the Magpie Murders versus Magpie Murders.
He might have killed him over the bill for all those drinks.
Yeah, that was a lot of money.
Okay.
All right. My number 2 suspect is Lee Jaffery, the Triple W.
Triple W.
Yeah, the ripped off writing waiter.
Yeah, he did get ripped off. Maybe he can't write so well, but he did get ripped off.
Well, I mean, if it was just the name, maybe he wouldn't be able to complain, but cutting off the head, he's got a good complaint if he can establish it. My number 1 suspect is Jemima. That's right. I said her disappearance was a red herring, but also, didn't I mention I was going to cover my ass, Bubba? Jemima is my 3rd suspect, and she'll get added to the list. Now, Bubba, I said also for every murder I was going to do a quadruple C.
Quadruple C?
Yeah, catfish, clear conscience, cross out. Last week, my quadruple C was Susan. This week, it's Detective Locke. Mm-hmm. He had nothing to do with it. I'm really going out on a limb here. I was very scared that I actually got rid of someone who could have done it last week, Bubba. I kind of was a little safe this week. I'll step it up next week.
For those of you paying attention at home, so in the real world mystery, Detective Locke is cleared. But last week, I'm pretty sure in the fictional mystery, you were pointing, at least for one of the deaths, you were saying, look at Detective Chubb. So this is very interesting. Okay.
I did. You're right. And I know that I said that I thought the same person would be the killer in both. So let's hold on. Right, now, for Mary Blakiston, my previous subjects were Magnus, who I said intimated was the father of her children, Lady Pye, because Magnus was the father of her children,
right,
and the neighbor. I said the neighbor twice, Bubba. It's the shopkeeper this time, and even though he looks very good for it this week, very suspicious. In fact, I think you'd have to say if he's a red herring, he was the reddest and biggest of all fish this week. Picking him again would be a waste of a guess. So all new again this week, Bubba. Number 3, Joy Sunderling.
All right. She's killing Mary Blakiston, you're saying? Okay.
Yes, for killing Mary Blakiston. She was the least likely.
That's true, but she does have a good motive, I would say, you would think.
She does. But also, since it was pointed out by Susan's associate that she's the least likely, that makes it unlikely. Wait, did I say unlikely? Least likely again, boom, she's a suspect.
Lock Joy up. She can't kill again.
No.
Number 2.
I'm going to give it to Robert Blakiston. I mean, he was just tired of being henpecked by his mom. Also, she was very, very racist, and he didn't want to have to deal with that. He didn't want to have to deal with
Or he really didn't want to change that light in her bathroom.
He's done with it.
Right.
Number 1, this week I'm saying suicide. She was so racist, she threw herself down the steps so that she wouldn't have to deal with her eventual mixed-race grandchildren, just like Queen Elizabeth.
Boy. Topical.
All right.
Right. So you always love to clear somebody with your clear conscience.
All right, so last week I did, you're right, for Mary Blakiston's death, I cleared Chubb. This week I'm going to clear Magnus for the death, even though I said last week he was a very strong suspect. This week, he's cleared by Catfish. You don't have to keep thinking about him anymore.
Mary Blakiston's got this slightly weird death of she fell down the stairs. It could have been an accident, could have been a suicide, could have been murder. But then we have, once again, Sir Magnus, his head was chopped off. Mm-hmm. And this is a character based off Susan's father. Mm-hmm. There's no way you can chop off your own head. Not, with a sword from a suit of armor. So
there could, but you'd have to be very dedicated. Last week, last week was the first week that he died. So I couldn't comment earlier. So the 3 suspects I had last week were Lady Pye.
Right.
She is the wife to the double P, philandering Pye.
Aw.
The NIMBY group, don't develop Dingle Dell. And Chubb, who I said did it for the grub, the spread.
Okay.
So guess what, Bubba? All new suspects this week. Again, I'm casting a wide net before I spring all 3 of my traps, and that will be very soon. Definitely within the next 3 episodes. All right, number 3, Bubba.
Yeah.
The neighbor killed Magnus Pye. Now, I said he killed already Mary Blakiston, but now I'm saying he killed Magnus Pye and stole that silver. Bubba, I don't know if you're aware of this, but he was very suspicious in this episode, and I hadn't named him yet, so I definitely had to name him.
Man, do you notice how when it's the 50s, they kind of play up their accents a bit more? I love his accent. I hope he's guilty just so we can hear more of his lilting tone.
I love it. My number 2 suspect, Lady Chatterley's lover, a.k.a. Brent. He's out there chopping wood with a beard. He had been fired because of the burglary, and he knew that Pye had a wandering eye.
You have a number 1 suspect in the terrible death of Sir Magnus Pye.
I do, Bubba. Her name is Darnley. She has a name, Bubba.
She does have a name. The actress not appearing in this novel, apparently, unless she's in the final chapter. And if she shows up in the final chapter, won't that be fun? All right. You got to clear somebody every. Oh.
All right,
you got to clear somebody every week. Who are you going to clear?
All right. So last week, I didn't clear anybody. It was the first time he died, so I didn't have enough suspects. This week, I've cleared Chubb. That's right. That's right, Bubba. Chubb, Locke, they're completely cleared. You can no longer need to worry about Chubb or Locke. As I said, and I still maintain, whoever it was in the book is the one in real life. Chubb and Locke, that's a stone cold lock for me, Bubba. Those are quadruple seed. Clear conscience, cleared by catfish.
I love how you support the police. Okay.
Bubba?
Yeah.
I only have one question for you. Another one. Sorry. This is an addendum catfish question. Sure. When are we adding Sam to this list?
What do you mean by that?
I mean, Sam died suspiciously. Drowned Sam died 13 years ago. There's a lot of talk that it's Joyce Sunderling is trying to say to Robert Blakiston that's got something to do with it, this whole thing. And he's like,
right, 3 murders 12 years apart. It can't have anything to do with anything. Old Sam Blakiston.
Yeah. I mean, I think there has to be, you can't say 3 murders 13 years apart. I think you need to say 1 murder 13 years ago and 2 back to back.
Right. They're making up for lost time.
Yeah.
Well, listeners, what do you think? Should we put Sam's death as a murder? It was always called the tragedy at the lake or the accident. Yeah. Let us see. Hey, we keep asking you for feedback, and we got some great feedback this week. You ready, Catfish? We got this feedback from Cheryl, who said, I'm loving Magpie Murders.
Love it.
Just thrilled you are reviewing it. Oh, well, thank you, Cheryl.
We're here for you, Cheryl.
Luca wrote in and say, I still believe Joy killed Mary, but I don't believe she killed Sir Magnus. I believe that the murder of Sir Magnus Pye was a different person. My current theory is that Robert, believing Magnus was his father, and the only reason his mother, Mary, left her husband, and Robert confronted Magnus Pye. Magnus yelled at Robert, trying to convince him he wasn't Robert's dad. Robert snapped and murdered Magnus. Or better yet, Magnus was responsible for the drowning of Robert's brother Sam 12 years prior, and Robert finally, 12 years later, took revenge. What do you think of Luca suspecting the young couple in love, Joy and Robert, of 1 murder each? They're perfect for each other.
They are perfect for each other. I think this is a good note. I mean, I don't know whether you believe it or not, but Lady Chatterley's lover was very open about Magnus Pye's dalliances, but he makes it clear that, at least in his opinion, that Mary Blakiston wasn't among those because she was not as delectable as Magnus Pye wanted. So I have to admit, I was a little convinced by that, Bubba, that Magnus Pye was not involved with Mary Blakiston. Although we keep hearing more about their relationship. Everyone has an opinion on their relationship, which is a weird thing to say about somebody who worked for somebody else.
Right.
And devoted to him, and how he treated the help, how he treated her. There's a lot of talk about that.
Right. And Francis Pye in last week's episode was very much
Francis.
Right. Frances was very adamant to Atticus. She's like, there wasn't a relationship between the two of them. She was the housekeeper. But then in the same breath, she said he was inappropriate with help. So something odd going on there for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, we had this feedback from Jonathan, who said, if the tragedy at the lake occurred in 1943 or 12 years prior to this magpie murder story that we're reading, I wonder if there's some sort of significance there. In episode 1, Atticus Pound is shown at the doctor's office with a concentration camp ID tattoo. He would have had to have been around to investigate the tragedy, so I wonder how he knows about the tragedy. Who told him? What was he told? Jonathan continues, I'm also wondering if we're comparing the wrong deaths and murders. While the deaths of Alan and Mary may seem similarly suspicious, I see more correlation between Alan and Magnus Pye. Both have similar personalities, live in the same home, have the same son. Perhaps they're murdered by the same person. If this is true, then perhaps there are other characters that seem to correlate, but actually don't. Love this feedback from Jonathan.
Yeah.
Jonathan's top 3 suspects so far are James, Sajid Khan, the lawyer, and then Claire / her story character, Clarissa. I love that feedback from Jonathan. Any thoughts, Catfish?
I agree with it, and I definitely have named all those people and haven't cleared any of them.
Very good. All right, here we go. We got a big final bit of feedback from Darby, who has a long thing, but they start off saying, I got to agree with Catfish on this one.
Yes.
Dingle Dell is a funny name. Every time I hear Ding Dong Dell and the whimsy of that next to these gruesome murders, it makes me laugh every time. Darby writes that they had to Google if people's names, things like Dingle Dell, and yes, they do. A notable recovered meteorite is named Dingle Dell.
Ha ha! Is
Darby
that a clue?
says, right, Darby says, I'll eat my hat and Catfish's hat if that's relevant to the case. But I do enjoy that. Darby and you are on the same page here, Catfish. Darby says, I do agree that anagrams will play some role in solving the mystery.
Thank you, Darby.
Considering how heavy they feature in the opening of the show, though, when they briefly scramble the cast names, I think it'll be a legitimate clue. Not that I have any business solving anagrams. I only just now on my second viewing of the video realized that Magnus Pye could be shortened to Magpie.
Oh my God, Darby, we are completely on the same page. This is my third.
Yeah, hold on. Catfish, are you writing feedback as Darby?
No, I am not, but and you know that I did not read this feedback at all. I just came to that conclusion on my own. Oh my God, Darby, you and I, frighteningly, we're on the same page. In fact, if you think you know who it is, Darby, please hit me up at CJGman67. I will go with you.
Now, Darby says, my top suspect would be Sajid Khan. I think, for the fact that the whole Agatha Christie twist of assumption connection.
Okay.
Sajid deliberately drops that Alan told him that a character would appear in the book based on him, which seems unlike Alan, who definitely didn't tell his sister that she was in the book.
Ooh, I like that. I like that.
Perhaps it was an attempt by Sajid's part to link himself to the book explicitly, and if the character based on him is exonerated, then he wouldn't have looked at the real-life murder that seemed to be based on the narrative. I think whoever sent the letter purposefully sent it with a mismatch envelope in order to make it mirror the book, which it's reversed in the Magpie Murders manuscript, in order to make people think that whomever committed the murder of Alan Conway absolutely had to be someone included in his manuscript as a guilty party. Sajid Khan could have done so.
Well, but let's be honest, though, because Darby and I are so close. So I just want to talk to Darby as if I talk to myself. Is there anyone in this book that is not any character that's not based on a person we've seen in real life? Well, Susan's sister, Andreas, Susan's boss. I mean, there are some people.
But there are also people in the book that we haven't yet seen in real life either. Like, I don't think we've seen Joy or her boyfriend Robert yet.
Right.
And we met the neighbor Jack. In the novel, he has that wife who comes into the shop and said, no, that silver came from a swap meet, not from Sir Magnus's house. So we still got to make those connections if they exist.
Do we ever see someone in modern day that Atticus Pund was modeled after? I'm surprised he wasn't modeled after Alan himself.
Right.
We don't see Alan as Pund.
Right. Now, there are a lot of great points people are making because who does Atticus spend all his time with? James. for most recently, Alan spent all his time with James, right? So there are
Right.
odd connections, but I love everybody's detective work. The final thing Darby writes is,
Yes.
I'm not saying Sajid Khan did it. I just think that makes him suspect number one. And it may be evoking Agatha Christie. He said the story is trying to make me watch out for an "and then there were none" type fake out and all the false assumptions that come with that. Darby writes, I'm happy to eat crow on this one. I'm totally in the dark on the who of the done it.
Oh,
Wonderful
man.
feedback. This is all great feedback.
Thank you so much, Darby. First of all, you make me feel seen, Darby.
Listeners, we love this feedback. Once again, if you're on YouTube, you go down, tell us your top 3 suspects, tell us what you think. We're at the halfway point. How do all these things tie together? What is the one clue we're missing? Now, let me say, I've seen next week's episode, and I think it's the most fun of them all. We're going to be seeing Alan's funeral, and of course, at the same time, Sir Magnus Pye's funeral, and going to have some fun with that. Once again,
oh my God,
down in the YouTube comments, you can also reach us on Facebook.com/PHQ, Twitter and Instagram @PHQ. For people who love long feedback and maybe don't want to write it in YouTube comments or on Twitter with character limits, you can write us hello@PPmedia.com as an email. For everybody here, my name's Bubba. You can find me on Twitter @FitandTrim. That's FITTENTRIM @FitandTrim on Twitter.
And I am Catfish. You can hit me up @CJGman67 on Twitter. And hey, if you have not read the book, but you think you have a good idea who did it and you have a good explanation, I could use the help. Bubba is always texting me saying he expects me to solve this. That's not what I'm here for. I'm here to bring the jokes. So if anyone can help me with that part of it, I'd appreciate it. But only if you have not read the book.
My name's Sir Magnus Pye.
Oh, man.
You get it now, Catfish. No.
Oh, man, I did not get it. What's wrong with me?
We'll see you next time on Let's Solve MAGPIE Murders.